My friend Liv, she's a poker player, philosopher of sorts, great human being. She has a podcast called Win-Win that everybody should listen to. And the whole purpose of the podcast and her whole way of being and spirit is to find win-win solutions. So do you think of economic life as having such win-win solutions? So being able to find rules where everybody wins, or is it always going to be zero sum?
I definitely believe in win-win, but with a big asterisk. Like you can have win-win, but it can feel like win-lose, which is it's not just are people getting more? It has a lot to do with do people feel they're getting more and do people feel they're getting what's fair and equal? So you could have a situation, for instance, if you look at the history of going back to Chile, it has steady growth, steady income growth, steady diminution of inequality, and a high level of discontent within the society and a high level of belief that the society is corrupt and unfair. And that's what matters. How people feel about it, how people perceive it matters. And you can't, we saw this recently. You can't just come out with a bunch of statistics and tell people you're winning in this game if they feel like they're losing. So that goes to all the non-rational factors and all the comparative factors that people have when they think about where they are vis-a-vis other people in society. So we're just incredibly social creatures. We're incredibly attuned to our status, to rising and falling, to where we sit vis-a-vis others. And so that absolutely has to be attended to. It can't just be an economic analysis.
That's so interesting that the experience of the economy is different than the reality of the economy. On the topic of corruption, I think the reality of corruption versus the perception of corruption is really important in a lot of these nations. You take Ukraine, for example, the perception of corruption has a big impact on the economy. You don't want to invest, you're very cautious as a business person. The reality of corruption can be way different than the actual perception. But if narratives take hold, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that it has a big effect on the psychology of the people involved. It's interesting.
Yeah, this goes back to Keynes's analysis of the Great Depression, right? If people won't invest, if they're spooked, if the investing classes are spooked, you could be in real trouble. And in some ways, this simple analysis of the problem and proposal of a solution was enough to restore eventually the path to economic prosperity, right? That's Franklin Roosevelt. Nothing to fear but fear itself. The sense of we know we have a future, we have optimism, then you believe in it. And to go back to like thinking about money, right? Money works because we all believe in it. It's a form of social trust, and it's a form of belief and faith in our society and in the other people in it. And when that breaks down, the money system will break down as well.
Is there something that Milton Friedman said and thought about, how to control the psychology of humans at scale?
No, what's interesting is he does talk, especially in his later work, he says we have fiat currency and this is an experiment. And
Yeah.
we don't know how it's going to turn out. And it's turning out okay right now, but we've always had a commodity-based or backed currency of some form or another. And this is the first time. And so who really knows? So far, so good. And he also is very attuned. It's interesting in his later writings when he's thinking about this too. Sure, I could design a monetary system that would be different. But when I look at history, I see that monetary systems have always, say, incorporated the role of the state because it's so important to people. And so therefore, my theoretical designs really have to be tempered by what I've actually seen happen in history.
So maybe we could speak to this tension between how much government intervention is okay for Milton Friedman. So he was against minimum wage, but he was for guaranteed minimum income. Can you explain actually the difference between the two?
Yeah, so this was one of the discoveries I made in my research. I found a paper from 1938 he wrote advocating what we would call today a universal basic income, a minimum income. And he basically sees this as part of the effort to create a new liberalism, right? And he basically says we have advanced societies, we have prosperous societies. We have decided, in keeping with our morals and our ethics, that people should not be starving in an advanced society like this. The question is, how are we going to make that happen? And he ended up believing the best thing to do was to put a floor under everybody. And he said, you can get that based on your income. If you have a lot of income, you don't get it. If you have a little income, you might get a little bit of it. If you have no income, you get enough of it. And he believed in the beginning you should base that on, what was required to buy food, right? That would be kind of an objective. You could objectively determine the nutrition and the price of food. And so that for him, it's important. He says it's keeping with a liberal polity because it's not intervening in the price system. It's not intervening in economic relations. And it does not, in his view, require a bureaucracy to administer. It does not, in his view, require that you qualify for it by virtue of being in a protected class. You just get it as kind of part of your membership in this general citizenship body. And so that to him was really different than a minimum wage because it did not interfere with the work bargain. His belief about minimum wages was specifically that it priced out unskilled labor, that what an unskilled laborer had to offer was a willingness to work for a very low wage. And if you set the minimum wage too high, businesses, instead of hiring that higher priced labor, would not hire. Or like we could think of today, right? They put in an electronic checkout, or something like this, where you don't actually need the labor. So he really believed the minimum wage had that perverse incentive. Now, this is a live debate on what minimum wages do, and there seems to be a level at which you can set them that they can not have that perverse effect and in fact can kind of create people with more spending money that then powers the economy. So he had a very sort of clinical analysis of that. Rather than an empirical one or a really abstract analysis. But the minimum income is fascinating because it seems very leftist to us. But what it is it's purely individualistic. And it never really happened because it was so purely individualistic, because American social policy typically identifies like this group of people is deserving and will give them benefits. So the classic example is soldiers, veterans. Another example is mothers raising dependent children. These people deserve money. The rest of you better go out and work. And so Friedman's proposal, it really caught on in the 60s. It ultimately went nowhere, but it was no litmus test, no income analysis, just we're going to give you this much. Everyone's going to get this much. And he decided once mass taxation had come in, you could do it through taxes. And you could just rebate people who didn't pay income taxes, got a rebate. That actually came to pass. It's the earned income tax credit. And it's considered extremely successful, by policy analysts. It does what it's supposed to do. It's not that expensive. And so I see that as a kind of paradigm of his thinking, in that instead of creating a bureaucracy that does some form of redistribution, or instead of trying to intervene in the market for labor or the market for something else, the market for housing, you provide a cash grant that people spend for themselves. And so, interestingly, that's what happened in the emergency situation of COVID, right? That's exactly what people did. They followed that model. We just get money out quick. And there's a lot of discussion still about UBIs as something that should be done. And I think it's always going to be hard to pull off, because I think Americans and their elected representatives don't want to provide a universal benefit. They want to provide a targeted benefit because they believe there's like a moral component here. And Friedman advanced a policy that was really abstract and really just, kind of, it was devoid of judgment. It was like pure and beautiful in that way, but like utterly impractical.
And it really focused on not interfering with the market and the signals that the market provides. Like, it was really against price controls for the same kind of reason.
Yeah, exactly. You could say, okay, but how does this not interfere with the market, right? If you provide people with a minimum income, won't that change their incentives to work, et cetera? I mean, there's a big body of research on this. Most of it seems to show, one, it's way better than the current benefits cliff, where you have to not work to get your benefits. And any incentive impact on working seems to be much lower than would be expected. But I'll let the economists and the social scientists fight that one out and figure it out empirically. Hopefully we should be able to.
Yeah, there's been a bunch of studies. It's interesting, even just how you conduct studies like this, how you do these kinds of experiments, especially if you're empirically minded. because a lot of the studies I saw are pretty small.
Right.
And so how do you make big conclusions about how to run the world, how to run economies from such small studies? It's all a fascinating experiment of ideas. And it's also inspiring to see individuals and maybe small groups of individuals like the Chicago School of Economics to sort of shake up what we believe and how we run the world.
Yeah.
Inspiring.